controversy in Ann Arbor schools over standardized testing.
This year, about 100 kids at Ann Arbor Open, that's a magnet school in the district, sat out the M-STEP test, the new standardized test in Michigan. That test has drawn criticism from some parents and from some teachers who say it takes time away from other teaching, puts too much stress on kids, and doesn't clarify how results are used.
But in Michigan, if fewer than 95% of a school's students do not take a standardized test, the state can give the school a failing grade. And recently, Ann Arbor Pioneer, considered one of the top high schools in the state, actually dipped below that benchmark and received a failing grade.
That can affect the way schools use money and possibly impact enrollment. So now the school board is considering a policy that would potentially remove students from magnet schools if they do not take any tests.
And this is all really reigniting an old debate about whether schools are over-tested students are over-tested in school. Testing has been used to measure teacher and student achievement, right? But some are concerned that there simply is too much testing, which takes away from other learning. I know my kids always complain there's too much testing.
Oh,
right?
you betcha. Joining us now is Dr. Thomas Padroni, an associate professor of curriculum studies at Wayne State, also director of the Leonard Kaplan Education Collaborative for Critical Urban Studies at the school. And Gary Nayart, the executive director of the Great Lakes Education Project, will also join us in this discussion.
Yeah, I want to thank you for being with us. Dr. Padroni, let's start with you. Now, why do we see the reliance on testing that we do, and how did we end up having this debate?
Well, I think that all of us experienced standardized testing when we went to school, but standardized testing today is very different than it was when many of us were younger. We all remember taking some of those pencil tests where we filled in the blanks. Today, testing is used so often because we have believed falsely that it's a way of detecting poor performance of teachers, poor performance of schools. And so what we end up doing is we've saturated our school day with so much testing that the testing is really driving the curriculum. It's not just all of the time that students actually are taking the test, but it's all the time that students spend preparing for the test, all the disruption that causes within the school day for students. And it completely affects the culture of the school as well, where we're no longer thinking about creative, critical thinking, about creativity, about learning subjects deeply, but we're thinking about how to perform well on tests to produce higher test scores.
If I heard you right there, you don't believe these tests then are a good way to measure teacher success and outcomes in schools, is that right?
That's absolutely the case.
And why not?
Well, one of the things that we know is the world's lead statistical organization, the American Statistical Association, has issued a very comprehensive report urging extreme caution with using these tests for these purposes, because they say that except for 1 to 15 or 14% of the result on a test is determined by things that are completely outside of the teacher's control. And therefore we end up punishing teachers for results that had nothing to do with their effectiveness. Of course we want to have effective teachers in the classroom, but this is not the way of measuring it.
So, Doctor, what is the way of measuring it?
Well, what we need is we need effective forms of evaluation. We need to have effective peer assessment by principals and colleagues. We can also use some testing data for diagnostic purposes to help guide the kind of improvement that all teachers need to make. All teachers need to be improving professionally as they move through their career, but they don't need false results that drive the very talented teachers that we need away from wanting to be teachers in the first place.
Gary Nayart is executive director of the Great Lakes Education Project. Gary, I assume that you are disagreeing with some of what you've heard here, and that you believe that standardized testing is an effective way to measure teacher success and an important part of the process in the education process?
Well, we think that it's a piece of the puzzle, and even in the evaluation bills that are working their way through the legislature today, the results of the statewide standard assessment make up no more than 20% of the value of a teacher's evaluation. So 80%, or the vast majority, is actually coming from information beyond the assessment. So we think this is really much to do about nothing and making a mountain out of a molehill.
Now, I had kids who went through the system. Now they're both graduated from college, but during that time the common complaint was that we seemed to be teaching our children the tests, but we really weren't teaching them subjects. We were just teaching them to pass a test. Is this accurate? Is this fair?
I'm not sure that that's a fair statement. It's true that we need assessments in order to measure progress against the content expectations that students have, and it's not unreasonable to expect students to be tested on subject matter and to know how they're doing. It's not unreasonable to expect to evaluate teachers not necessarily on the proficiency of their students, which is what we would have done in the past, but to do it the way we're proposing to do it, which is based on the growth of their students. How well did they help their students improve in knowledge from September until May?
We talked about this 95% benchmark when we were talking about the Ann Arbor schools here, that Ann Arbor Pioneer listed as a failing school because at least 95% of the kids didn't take the M step.
They opted out.
Right. I mean, it kind of seems, is that a fair thing to do in a district like Pioneer that scores so high in so many other ways?
Well, of course it's not.
Well,
right?
Unfortunately, you have districts that have high proficiency, high test scores, but the federal law requires that we test 95% of students, and I don't think it's wrong to suggest that we might test students too much today, but much of that is because we're testing students to meet federal mandates and state mandates for accountability, but we're also testing students to figure out how well they're doing to improve teaching and learning. And I think there is a viable discussion to have about the amount of testing that we're doing, the type of testing, and when we're doing it, but to simply argue that we should not use testing at all or to opt out from testing, we think is irresponsible and doesn't set kids up for success in school or nor for later in life.
Yeah, Dr. Padroni, you were about to
Sure.
chime in on that also?
Well, I do want to say that testing can be useful, and so I think that Gary and I agree with that there are uses for standardized tests. They can help teachers to diagnose where students are at. Where we probably also agree is around the issue of choice. I know that Gary Nayert and his organization strongly support issues of parental choice, and we do when it comes to opt-out as well. We believe that ultimately the parents are the best deciders of what's best for their children, and if parents believe that their school day curriculum is too affected by the mandates of testing, which have no validity and are really mainly enriching the companies that produce the tests, then I think that we should be supporting the right of parents to opt their students out of the test as well.
And finally, Dr. Padroni, this M-STEP was new this year. I know my students said, I would have rather taken the other test that we took last year, not the M-STEP. Are you getting any feedback or anything you've heard in the industry about that test and whether we'll continue with it?
I hear that we're on an incremental step towards something that is aligned around the Common Core, something that will be rolled out over the next year or two, and that this was an intermediary step that the Michigan Department of Education had to do because funding was not approved for that transition. But one thing that it does allow, although there was some chaos with the test this year as far as I understand, is it allows us to have a longer discussion over the next year or two so that Gary and I and others can keep putting our ideas into the public sphere, sharing with the public what the research says about the uses of these tests, but also the cautions that we should pay attention to.
You understand, both of you, the frustration parents have trying to figure out where their kids are. Are they going to get tested? Aren't they going to get tested? How is this going to weigh in on their futures in college and so forth? So how do you assure them that we are moving towards something that is indeed truly standardized and that will help them in the long run?
I think that the best determiners of the quality of what is happening in the classroom are teachers. We've always educated our teachers to be very competent professionals, and in the end, that's who parents trust. They trust the view of teachers and their professionalism much more than they do the tests, and the test should simply be a guide and shouldn't be the main course for determining that. What the tests mainly tell us is where the lower socioeconomic students live.
Now, Gary, that was my fault. I should have directed the question to either or both of you. Your turn on this one.
Okay, I just wanted to say that we've had the MEEP test for 40 years. It's outlived its usefulness, and the state is moving in a new direction. I think we are looking that the M-STEP is going to be the test for the next generation. The Department of Ed has already awarded the contract to the same vendors so that this test will continue into the future. It will be aligned to our college and career ready standards as a state. Like I said, it's an important issue in education. It's not the only issue, and it's not the most important factor in education. Clearly the quality of teaching is the most important factor, but we do need to have standardized assessments in order to measure how our schools are doing for accountability, but also pinpoint for our students how to improve teaching and learning in the classroom to make every individual student prepared for college and career when they graduate.
It's an important issue, it really is, and we appreciate both of your takes on it. Dr. Thomas Padroni and Gary Nayert, thank you for your time today.
Absolutely.
And still ahead